You're listening to Therapy for Your Money, a podcast about all things money and finance for therapy practice owners. If you want to feel confident and in control of your financial life, then you've come to the right spot. I'm your host, Julie Harris. I'm an accountant and the owner of Green Oak Accounting. My firm specializes in working with private practices across the U.S., and my team and I have worked with hundreds of private practice owners. I'm on a mission to share all the best practices I've learned along the way because I want you to have a profitable private practice. Hi, everyone. Welcome back to Therapy for Your Money. Today, we're talking about adding groups to your practice as an additional revenue stream. My guest is Carrie Haynes. Welcome to the podcast.
Thank you. Thanks.
Can you tell us, Carrie, a little bit about yourself and your background?
Sure. Again, my name's Carrie Haynes. I'm a licensed professional counselor. I got my degree from Colorado State University in 2006, and I actually took a group course when I was in my graduate degree that really just, it was an advanced group course in the psychology department, and it was more focused on process-oriented group therapy. And there was something about the way that the professor talked about it and the nature of process-oriented groups that just got me super excited and passionate about group work. And so starting that early in my career, I was really interested in group work and just the different ways it could affect clients. And then I was fortunate to get an internship at the counseling center there at CSU. And they had a really phenomenal, thriving group program and really, really great training. So I was able to do what is called process observation, where we basically get to watch two skilled therapists lead a process group and get to learn from them, but not actually practice, which is a really unique opportunity as a therapist. A lot of us don't get that ability to be in the room with other therapists, doing their work and get to observe. And then I got to co-facilitate with a senior leader and moving into leadership. So it was a real apprenticeship model. And with each piece, I just loved the changes I was seeing in clients. I felt really, really inspired by the work and energized by what could happen in a group. And as I moved into my career, I ended up taking over the mentor who was there supervising all of us. I was her. So I ended up directing the group program there and did that for 10 years. And now, as I moved into private practice, I realized that there's a need for this type of training and support and education around group work because we just don't get it in our graduate programs. So now I offer consulting and just support on all areas of getting groups going in private practice.
Perfect. All right. And I'm so excited to have you on the podcast because I often hear from practice owners that they want to diversify their income. And from the times that we've met, I've heard from you that adding groups is a great way to diversify income and actually make a decent amount of money in a short period of time, right?
Absolutely. Yes. Yes.
So let's get started. When does it make sense to add groups to a practice?
So my philosophy is it makes sense probably as soon as you're maybe around, if you're just an individual practice, as soon as you have, I would say around 10 clients, you could start. And the reason I say that is because I think that from a marketing standpoint, if you are a single practitioner, it makes sense to have at least 3 clients that have some similar thread going on. So you could pull from your own clientele to start to fill your group and then look outside of that for referrals. If you're a group practice owner, you can add groups right away. If you've gotten to that point where you can support multiple clinicians, then I say adding groups from the beginning, because a lot of people have this misconception that group is only helpful to, it's billed a lot of the times as second-rate treatment. All of our individual slots are full, so now we'll offer group. And if you think about from a client perspective, that doesn't feel good to be oh, well, I can't get individual, but I can get into the group. And we know that group is just as effective as individual. All the research shows for most issues. So I think it's helpful to actually frame it as in what it is, which is like a really effective form of treatment, especially for relationship issues, which is what a huge percentage of clients come in with. So you start out with even at the intake, having groups in your practice so they know we value group work. It's part of what we offer. And you may see someone individually, but you may also be wanting to do group if that's going to be the best treatment for what you're working with.
Okay. And so Carrie, it sounds like having a group can be either an add-on for an existing individual client, or it can be for a client who maybe is not interested in individual work.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there's often times where I would have clients come in and I would say, they might say, I'm seeing a pattern in my relationships that keeps happening, and I'm noticing I'm unhappy in my relationships because I'm seeing this. And I will say to them, the best treatment for you, from what I know, is group therapy, because in our one-on-one relationship, we can talk about that pattern, but in group, I can actually see it happening. And so we can do that work in the moment. So unfortunately, we have a process group that we offer. So maybe you and I can meet for the first few sessions and we can get ready, but you could also participate in that process group, which would really help you to work on the issue right in the moment. So that's just an example. And there's so many different types of groups. So it just depends on what your specialty is, what your agency does, to know what type of group is going to best serve your population. But what I've found is there's a very, very small percentage of clients who would not benefit from group. So it's really changing our mindset to be instead of who would benefit, it's kind of who would not. And then how do I create groups? And then if you think about it, then you're also serving 8 clients, usually at a minimum. That's about how many in an hour and a half. So you're serving your capacity to serve more clients for less money on their part and making more money on your part. So it's sort of win-win-win.
Win-win-win. Well, so speaking of capacity, let's talk about space, right? And right now, most things groups are still seeing through telehealth for mm-hmm. now. But when we think about a practice and their physical space, what if they're not set up for groups? What if they don't have a larger meeting space? Then what can be a good option?
Yeah, that can be a challenge. I find that one is making an office set up. I know that there's some people who do it so that they have a little, because really if you can get 6 members in an office, that could be a small group. So you could use your individual therapy office. I know some other people who find an external space and they've used that to have groups. So another, maybe something close by that isn't in the actual center or in your office that has a larger meeting space that you can rent out or that you can contract with them. That's another option.
Okay. And I've seen some of our clients at least look for spaces with a conference room specifically to add that, or maybe even within the same building where there's maybe an evening that a business across the hall isn't using their conference room, and they might let them use that. So I've seen a lot of creative approaches, but you're saying as long as you can put at least 6 chairs in a room, once it's safe to do that again.
Once it's safe, yeah, not right now.
Not right now.
Also, I've seen people use their waiting area. So if anybody wanted to do an after hours group, if there's most of their clients are coming and they want to do a 6 to 7:30, sometimes they would only have a group running at that time, and then they use that waiting area to be the group room for the time being. So that's another creative way to do it. But now we have online, which is also pretty awesome.
Yeah. So in the age of telehealth, does an online group work just as well?
Yes. I think that there are some limitations, of course. There are things that happen online that actually enhance therapy. I've heard all these reports, which I actually was surprised about because I'm old school. I was we have to be in the same room together. We have to, feel each other. And, but I've found that the people that I've worked with are saying that they're actually surprised at how much clients are getting out of online groups. And there's something about people being in their own space, even being able to sit and make their own container, their own environment, that sometimes they're being more vulnerable and opening up more. maybe even getting to know each other faster because there's these little things that are happening, like a pet coming in or,
Okay.
So I think online does work well. And I think a lot of times it's our own barriers of what we're used to that we might project them onto clients when clients are adaptable, just and resilient, like we all have been, and find ways they can really appreciate. I'm really going to be curious when we are allowed to meet in person, how much we maintain doing some online offerings.
I share your curiosity with that because I think it will be really interesting to see in 2021 how many people actually go back to their offices or not.
I know.
Or not. We're seeing already a lot of clients not renew their leases and just stay virtual only.
Yeah.
All right, so let's talk about money around groups. So how do you approach pricing? What does that look like?
Mm-hmm. So typically groups are generally around $40 to $75 a session, I would say. And that's a pretty broad price range, but I would say 50 is about what I'm seeing. I'm here in Colorado, Fort Collins, and 50 is generally accepted as a regular price.
That's a private pay rate, right?
Private pay rate, yes.
Okay.
40 would be on the lower end.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Do you ever see sliding scales on a group as well?
Absolutely. Yeah. And the groups that I've offered, I've had maybe a certain numbers of spots that I would offer for sliding scale for clients who needed it, since in my private practice, I'm only private pay. So I always offer a sliding scale for a certain number of seats in the group.
Got it. And do you need a minimum number of people where you would run a group? Financially, like, do you have a minimum?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I never want to make less than my rate, which is $120. So I would never want to go lower for my individual client rate. I never want to go lower than that. And I would want to make $180 because it's an hour and a half. So you want to make sure. So I like to do the math like backwards, like looking at how much do you want to make? How much is your hourly rate? And then you might want to make a little more than that because group might take a bit more effort, saying like making sure that people come up or doing any of the administrative work with a group. You have to write more notes. So thinking about that as you factor in your time, because you never want to be resentful about the group work that you offer. But I find that there's still like a pretty wide margin, because I would say most of my groups run at 8 members minimum. And if those 8 members pay $50, that's $400 for, an hour and a half. So I have like a lot of space. And for the client, it's amazing because they get an hour and a half of treatment every week, because groups typically are offered weekly. You can do it in other formats, but I find that weekly is really helpful for the cohesion. But so they're getting great treatment that hour and a half, and I'm making more money. So it works out.
It works well. What about for an insurance practice?
Mm-hmm. So I find that insurance also reimburses decently well for group therapy. So right around that same average, around $40 for insurance companies, depending on where you are in the country. I've heard a little bit less. So I would just kind of check in and see. And then also they're often open to negotiation. So bringing your rate up or asking for a pay increase if you're offering group, especially because there's a lot of research that says it's just as effective and the insurance company is going to be paying less. So again, win-win. And so you can get reimbursed as long as it's considered a therapy group. It can't be like a support group. It has to be, you have to show that it's a therapy group. But that's pretty easy in what we do to most of the groups we're going to be running are therapy groups. So
got it. And are there any issues on the billing side, or is it pretty similar to just any other session as far as?
Yeah, very similar.
Okay.
Yeah, you just put in the group therapy code, and they reimburse pretty well. Mm-hmm.
So you kind of talk through how you look at how much money you're going to make in an hour. So how long do your groups usually run? Do you look at it over the course of many weeks, or how do you decide like how many groups to run concurrently? Can you talk us through that?
Yeah. So for me, I like to run my groups in about like 12 to 16 week chunks. And the reason I do that is, one, I think it's a lot as clients initially come in to invest in a group. And so as they come in, I want them to have enough time to really get close with the other members, to experience the curative powers, the magic that happens when group members start to connect with one another. But also, I want to have a time, like I find that even if there are many people that have groups going for years and years and years that are ongoing, meet every week for 10 years. When I first went into private practice, I was passed along. One of the therapists here went into retirement. And so I inherited his group, and the longest member there had been there for, I think, 14 years.
Wow. Okay. So
weekly.
Long time. Yeah.
Long time. But I would say for me, I think it's really helpful for you to even set a time limit and to see that's a good place for you to check in. How am I liking this? How is this going? And then also a chance for the group members to check in. So in case you want to make changes, things need to shift, the group, it just gives you a chance to change things if you want, or just to recontract for another so many weeks.
Okay, so it sounds like that it's a good stopping point in case someone is kind of ready to offboard, and you get to check in with yourself and decide if you want to keep going.
Yes, exactly. And also remember that like there's so many different types of groups. Like some people offer skills groups, so that might seem way too long. They may want to do like an 8-week section, or if somebody's offering DBT groups, if you're working with a population that would really benefit from DBT, oftentimes they'll do like a 4-week module where that person is required to be in individual therapy and do the group. And then there's a space, and then new members can come in. And oftentimes those groups can have more members because they're psychoeducational. So you can maybe fit 10 to 12 because they're done more like a classroom. Whereas like 8-person groups are more like process. So that also makes a difference in finances because if you could do like a 12 to 15-person group and it's more like a classroom, you may want to consider having 2 clinicians and paying both of them. 1, because you're making more, and 2, then if one gets sick or one can't come, the other one can have the group. And it also
so there's a backup.
Yeah. And it reduces like burnout and helps them to manage all the members. So, but the nice thing is that your clinicians will, probably make more if they're facilitating groups.
Okay. And so that's another good financial question. If you are paying a clinician, right, like you as the group practice owner are paying a clinician to do a group, how does that typically get set up? Like, how does the compensation structure look?
Mm-hmm. Well, I encourage group practice owners to keep the percentage the same if they can, because you want your clinicians to want to run the groups. You don't want them to be resistant. And sometimes they are if they have, they're just in their individual groove and it takes them less work. What would their incentive be in taking on more clients? So I find that if you keep your percentages the same, then they have an incentive to want to be part of the group. I also think if you can't do it that way, because different group practice owners have different ways that they do it, you can also offer some compensation for training and development and support, which is one of the ways I work with group practice owners. So I'll come in and help a group practice who doesn't really have any groups, or they're having a hard time getting their groups going. And I'll do kind of an assessment of like what's going well, what's not working. And then I'll help them to identify a coordinator of groups. And so then the group practice owner can just take it off their plate because they've already got a lot going on. But the coordinator really, it's nice because it's a staff member who gets to have a leadership role. And so they get a little compensation and they sort of organize the program. And I just teach them what I did at the university. I just teach them to hold my role in the group practice. And then if you compensate your therapists by giving them supervision and training, helping them develop, then they can get more excited about group work. And feel like they're getting something out of offering it. So I would say like with each practice, it's different, but I would think about what is the incentive for your staff to do that work and to learn more. Can they be paid a little bit more for offering groups because you're making more? I think that would be great.
Got it. I'm guessing that most of the time when a clinician agrees to do a group, it's not for financial reasons, right? It's not to make more money, but I see what you mean, where if the practice is making more, there has to be a financial incentive there. Too. It makes a lot of sense. So if a practice owner is wanting to add groups for the first time, like what would be kind of the first few steps that they would take?
So I think a nice start would be to really assess, like, what are we seeing? What are the themes that we're seeing in our population and the needs? And then what is the expertise of the staff? And are there any matches there? So if you're noticing, wow, like a lot of our clients are struggling with anxiety, and we have this person that has run anxiety groups in the past and feels really passionate about that, that's a perfect match. And you have this, you have this wonderful collaboration between what the clients need and what the staff member wants to offer. The other thing I think is really nice is to dedicate someone to that, because it's a lot of work for a group practice owner with everything they're juggling. But if you give someone a leadership role, like you have a clinical director, you have a group coordinator, and their job is to be really dialed into what do we need, where's the room, what's the setup. And so that's their role. How do we market? The other thing, and I think you and I talked about this a little bit when we met, is I think the other first, like even before you do that, actually, if I want to go back, is I really believe that one of the reasons that we don't have groups in practice is because in graduate school, we really were not trained well in group therapy. And we have a lot of myths and misperceptions about group work, and we carry them around. Like I learned that the number one reason clients do not participate in group is not because they don't want it. It's because of our own beliefs about group.
Wow. Okay.
Yes. Yeah.
So the way it was presented to them or not presented at all.
Yeah. It's kind of like we get this sense that it's second-rate treatment, and we get this sense that like groups don't work well. And we love our clients. We don't want to refer clients to something that we don't believe in, or that maybe is really difficult for us because we didn't get good training. So we weren't supported in running groups. And so we'll often say to clients like, well, I think we're going to offer a group. I don't know if it'll run, but if it does, do you want to do it?
Oh, so yeah, just the wording can make a big difference, right? Like if you're not even sure you're going to be able to fill it and run it. Interesting.
Yeah. So I would say make sure to assess kind of what are your own beliefs around group work. And it's not your fault because it's in the culture and it's in our programs. And I had my own, negative experiences with group work before I got some support. So I would say just identifying that in your staff and helping people get excited about group work, really framing it as like the benefit that it is and how it could really help clients, and identify people on staff that maybe already naturally feel that way, and they might be in that role of group coordinator. And then because what I find is if you can get the beliefs around group and the support for group and the excitement, if you have a group practice, it's just going to flow from there because you already have the connection between your therapists who trust each other and who will refer to each other, which is somewhat harder when you're in individual practice because you've got to make those connections across a community. Whereas in an agency or in a group practice setting, you already have the relationships to cross refer.
Yeah. So when I hear you mention a group coordinator, I can kind of hear the internal dialogue for some practice owners like, oh, that sounds expensive. I don't know if I can afford that, right? Is this just going to be something else on my plate? But what I'm hearing from you, though, I think, is that you're not hiring a full-time group coordinator. It's just someone on your team who has an affinity for that work and an excitement about that work, who's just adding maybe a few administrative hours, taking the lead on this project. Is that right?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah, that's it. They would be dedicated a few hours a month towards their group coordination, but the rest of the time they're just a staff member who is seeing clients, and they might transfer some of their clinical time, for more administrative time to do that work for you.
Okay.
Yeah.
So where they're helping think of like, what are the next groups we're offering, scheduling, like getting those things on the calendar, talking to the team about it, talking to the community about it, those kinds of things.
Yep.
Okay.
Absolutely. Yep.
Got it. All right, Carrie, I ask all of my guests this question. What is your favorite business or finance book and why?
So books, I'm not reading that many books these days. I notice I'm listening to more stuff because
Okay.
I have these little kids running around, but I can multitask by having it in my ears. But the business stuff that I've been listening to most recently is called the Life Coach School podcast.
Okay.
It's Brooke Castillo. And the reason why I found that really transformative is she talks a lot more around mindset, around money, and especially for women, and the limiting beliefs that keep us as women from stepping into making money and really reaching for and feeling comfortable with making money. So that's been transformative for me.
All right. I will check that out. So we'll link to the podcast, the Life Coach School podcast in the show notes, right? Did I get that right, Carrie?
Yep, you got it right.
Okay. The Life Coach School. Perfect. Carrie, thank you so much for coming on the podcast. Can you please tell us where our listeners can find you if they're interested in either your one-on-one coaching or your group coaching, about how to add groups to their practice?
Absolutely. Artofgroups.com is where you can find me. And the podcast is also called the Art of Groups podcast. And on the podcast, I give a lot of tips and strategies and tools, and also talk to other people who are facilitating groups. So that's a great place to get information. I offer one-on-one consulting and do some group practice owners. So I just take a couple group practice owners because that's more intensive work, every few months. And then also I have small group consulting where we meet and I kind of take you by the hand every step of the way to get groups up and running.
Got it. And perfect. Thank you for that. I use the word coaching, but consulting probably was the better word. So you do one-on-one consulting. If someone wants to just consult with you for a few hours to talk about adding a group, that's an option.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Great. All right. Thank you so much for coming on. I've loved chatting with you today.
Thanks for having me.
So after Carrie and I recorded, I wanted to add just a little segment to share what I've seen as far as paying clinicians for group work in the setting of a group practice. So in a group practice where clinicians are typically paid a percentage or a commission of the work done, sometimes that commission will extend to the group session as well. So for example, there's 8 clients in a group and they're each paying $50 each. That's $400 to the practice. And then in the case of a 50% commission, the clinician would be making $200. Sometimes there are additional administrative fees for a group session, right? So there might be additional marketing costs if you have a group leader role. If there are other expenses that you need to cover, then sometimes we might do a flat fee for that group session where the clinician is still making more, and in a lot of cases, a lot more than if they were seeing an individual client, but they're not necessarily having the same percentage, right? So in this case, if a client was seeing a therapist individually and they were paying, for example, $120 per session, that 50% commission would be $60, right? So if we're looking at a group rate for that same hour, maybe the clinician would make $100. So they're still making a lot more than they would by seeing an individual client to compensate for the work that they're doing in the group. So when it comes to a flat fee practice where the clinician is getting paid a certain dollar amount for each session, it makes a lot of sense to just come up with a separate dollar amount for that group session. Sometimes it can be a dollar amount per client in the group, or sometimes it's just a flat fee per group session. But again, this is one of those cases where there's going to be a different rate for that group session versus the individual session. If you'd like to find out more about Carrie's consulting business, head over to therapyforyourmoney.com. We're going to post a recap in the show notes of our conversation, and we'll also link to her as well. And I'm going to leave you with a little behind the scenes peek when Carrie and I chatted about waiting lists.
Well, and the other thing, the practice that I'm talking to, they have a 200-person wait list.
What?
And I'm just like, if you have a wait list like that, like this is a
Yeah.
no-brainer. Like you need like to add in groups, like these people are just waiting. Like
Yeah.
if they want to get in and they just at least have a tie to your practice, you can offer something, if your clinicians and all those people some people just sit in therapy, they don't move.
Yeah.
And so group is a nice way to get them a little more independent. So they're,
Oh,
moving
okay.
people through. But anyway, but we should not be having wait lists see, that's again, the belief that in some way individual is better than group.
Yeah.
There would be no reason. And if group is just as effective, especially for anxiety, depression, relationship issues, you've just taken a huge chunk.
If you're looking for accounting help, head over to therapyforyourmoney.com/accounting to find information about my accounting firm and all of our specialized services just for private practice owners. If you enjoyed today's episode, we'd love for you to give us a 5-star rating on iTunes. Just head over to iTunes, click on ratings and reviews, and give us a quick shout out. We really appreciate it.
The information contained in this podcast represents the host and guest's general opinions and should not be construed as personalized accounting and tax advice. Listeners should consider all facts and circumstances before applying this information and seek appropriate advice from an accountant, financial planner, lawyer, or other professional. Any info provided does not constitute accounting, tax, or legal advice.